Well, good evening once again. I am Reverend Sherry L. Jackson, based in Alexandria, Louisiana. And tonight, this is part two of lesson 21, the Red Sea to Sinai. Tonight, we will review and move on to the second part of this lesson. And as a point of review, we are at the point where we've gotten through that 10th plague, which was the uh, plague of the firstborn, the death of the firstborn. And by this time, Pharaoh has let the Israelites go, and then he changes his mind and he pursues them. And this is where we get the miracle of the Red Sea, where God held back the waters for the Israelites to get through, but then he closed them. And we remember the song that we sang, Pharaoh's army got drowned in the Red Sea. Now, if you were with us last week, we said that in our English version, we call it the Red Sea, but it was actually the Sea of Reeds, Reeds. It was like a marshy area, and the color, it looked as if it was red from all of the marshy area, I guess, sort of like seaweed, so to speak, and thus it's called the Red Sea. As a review, we talked about the two ordinances that God left for the Israelites to remember. And remember, all the time, I've always told you that the Jewish faith is all about remembering. It's all about remembering, and specifically remembering this time when God delivered the Israelites out of bondage or captivity under Pharaoh. And so it was two things that they were to remember. They were to remember the Passover, and they were to tell their sons how God brought them out, and also to tell them about the redemption of the firstborn. Now remember that Pharaoh, if you go back all the way to the beginning of Exodus, where Pharaoh had ordered the midwives to kill the firstborn, it's like God in the 13th chapter is reversing that and is now saving the firstborn. So it shall come be when your sons ask you, what is this? Then you're going to tell them how God brought them out. So it is all about remembering. And the two, when we get to the Lord's Supper, remember, we spent a lot of time on the Passover and how it has transcended to the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper is also about remembering. It is remembering what God did through Jesus to bring us out of the bondage of sin. We also talked about real good last week, what we call, God said he wanted them to have a sign, and that sign was, if we go back to Exodus 13, he told them to wear these phylacteries around their heads or their foreheads. And in this box, if you could tell, if you've ever seen an Orthodox Jew, they will have this leather strap around their shoulder, around their arm, and this box that's around their forehead. And this is based on Exodus 13, where God told them to wear a sign on their forehead. And so in this box, they have 4 strips of paper that contains the summary of what God did for them. And they do this in their prayers. And I told you the story of how when I went to Israel and we were on this plane, at a certain time in the morning, around 5 or 6, all these Jewish men were jumping up, going to a private part of the plane where they could perform their prayers, and they will wrap this leather around their arms, just like we can see in this picture, and they would put the box around their forehead, and in that box were scriptures that reminded them of what God had done for them. So, and at the end, when they get where they took the bones of Joseph with them, because Joseph had asked that when they go, that they would take his bones with them, for he had made them swear that they would do that, and they did. And that's in Exodus 13 and 19. So when we also talked about last week that we made a big deal about the shortest way is not always the best way. And if you could see on this map, this is the map, the route that they took. If you can see this red, they start here in Egypt, and they come all the way down through the Red Sea and go back up, because they are trying to get over here to Canaan. Well, there was a shorter route that they could have gone up just round the Mediterranean Sea and got there, and it would have been the shortest route. But God knew that they were not prepared for the Philistines and all of those who had set up forts along this route called the Way of the Sea, and that they could have gotten discouraged and returned back to Egypt. So God took them the longer way, because there were also some lessons that he needed to teach them to get them prepared to be his people. And so by taking the longer route, they will experience some things that they would not have experienced had they gone around the shorter way. And we really talked about how in our lives, sometimes we want a quick fix. Sometimes, at least I do, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I want a quick fix, but the quicker way is not always the best way. And although they could not see the traps that were laid for them, God saw. And just think about in your own lives the times where you wanted something, or you wanted to get somewhere quicker, you wanted something right now, and God did not give it to you, and you were kind of like, at least for me, why I can't have it now? Why I can't have it now? But God knows the traps. And so even though he takes us the longer way around, and even the longer way around, they are still going to have some bumps and bruises. But God is trying to teach them how to be his people. Because remember, they have come out of Egypt. They have come through a place where there were lots of gods, and God is still trying to shape them to be the people who will only worship Yahweh. And so again, he does not take them straight across by the way of the sea. He instead takes them all along the Red Sea to bring them back up, to get them back to Canaan, to the promised land. And so doing this, there are at least 10 complaints that Israel will lodge against Moses and ultimately against God. So in between chapters 14 and chapters 18, there are 10 complaints. And the first complaint was in Exodus 14:5 through 14. Exodus 14:5 through 15, where they actually said, Moses, if you were going to bring us out here to die, we could have died in Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die? And that was the whole story of seeing that army behind them. And so they complained and said, we could have died. If we were going to die, we could have died in Egypt. We didn't have to come out here to die. And so God performed this miracle. He dried up the sea so that they could come through. But just as soon as they did, God delivered them from that. There was another complaint. But God used all of these complaints, and the whole purpose of this wilderness experience was to teach them to trust God. Now just think about your own lives, how the wilderness, the season where it seems like it's dry and nothing is happening. And at least it's not happening the way that you would want it to. But God, is not so much that God causes things to happen, but he allows it to and uses it as teachable moments. Think about specifically teachers or even parents when their children have done something. It's not that the parents caused it to happen, but since it happened, they use it as a teachable moment. And this is what God is doing with this whole wilderness experience. God wanted to see if they would trust him. And so he wanted to challenge them to be his people and to live differently than all the other nations. And here's the thing about it. God knew that when they got to the promised land, when they got to Canaan, those same people who were there, if they had gone the shorter route, were still going to be there. And so God knew that they could not handle them now. But once they come through all of that wilderness experience, they will be more mature, and they could handle it at that time. They can handle it at their time. Pastor Green, are you on the line?
I am, and I appreciate you pointing out to us that sometimes we forget. It was easier to get Israel out of Egypt than it was to get Egypt out of Israel.
Yes.
We hold on to things in our past and our history, whatever it is or was, and that journey, we just like the alliteration piece sometimes. It was first the departure, then the dedication of the firstborn after the departure. The direction of the cloud and fire, I think that's something that, as powerful as we think about it, Moses really didn't know where he was going. He just followed the cloud during the day, which ultimately turned toward a pillar of light or fire at night. So Moses just followed the direction that God led them by keeping his eye on the cloud in the day and the fire at night. How the Red Sea was dried up, or the Sea of Reeds was dried up, the destruction of Pharaoh's army, the deliverance song sung by Moses and the people that made it, but then the dissatisfaction. Isn't it interesting that sometimes no matter how much good God is doing or people do for us, or how we may have a perfect rose garden, but there are some people who always see the one dead flower, the one bad rose, and never see the beauty of the majority. And a lesson I've learned from Israel in this experience of their emancipation is there were always those complaining about what they didn't have and not being thankful for what they did have. They had a God who was walking with them daily, and yet they found more reason to complain without giving God the opportunity to protect them. And so as we walk through this lesson, it's my prayer that as we look at our past and learn from it and recognize that in this chapter from 12 through 18, and we see the dissatisfaction of the people of God, and we pick up all of these daggum complaints that they're making about water and food and manna and the like thereof, they never stop to say thank you, Moses, for working with us to get us out of slavery as God answered our prayer. Not one time do I hear them or read about them celebrating Moses for his strong leadership in spite of all the things that he had to go through. So just in case you're a teacher, a preacher, or a leader, it may be a lesson we could learn here that the people we serve the most, as in this case, may not say thank you. Even though on Thanksgiving, they may not say it. Because in this book of Exodus, very few times do we hear people say, thank you, God, or thank you, Moses, about anything. But we do hear the complaints. There was no Walmart, no Kmart, no Sam's grocery, but yet God provided and protected them. And they didn't have bottled water, too. You might want to throw that out. They had sweet water and bitter water, but not bottled water. You own it. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And yes, Israel was full of complaints. And there is a method to the complaints. There's a pattern. They complain to Moses. Moses goes to God, take the complaint to God, and God tells Moses, and Moses comes back to the people. Now, I want you to see that pattern, and also to remember that Moses is acting as a mediator. Moses is acting as a mediator, and remember, we said earlier that Moses was a type of Christ, or a shadow of Christ. He will give us some glimpses of the work that Jesus would do. So he was the middleman. Christ is our mediator. He stands between us and God. And so Moses is acting as a mediator, and there's going to be one time where he's just going to be tired and say, God, these people that you gave me. And so let's just we'll walk through those complaints as we go. But the first one was when they saw Pharaoh's army coming, and they said, well, look, if we were going to die, it was enough graves to bury us in Egypt. We didn't have to come out here and die. And remember, these are people who have been in Egypt all of their lives. Perhaps they are scared. They don't know where they are going. Moses, as Pastor Green said, does not know where he's going. He is he is trusting God. And God is trying to shape the children of Israel to trust him. So when we get to the 15:22 through 40, through the end of the book, it's going to be a new section. Like the first section up until chapter 15 is all about getting them out of Egypt. And the second part is taking them, shaping them to be the kind of people that he needs them to be. Okay, I have a question here. Let's see, it says, is it safe to say that Israel has adapted when God is trying to adopt? I personally feel that because they have learned who they are, they have gained expectation of that they should have and caused their complaining because there were no known complaining. I'm not okay. As I can understand and appreciate this question, Israel still has a lot of Egypt in them. And so, yes, God is trying to adopt them or shape them to be something else, but they have so much Egypt in them. Just think about when we first become saved. We bring in everything. We bring in the streets with us. We bring in all our habits with us. We bring in everything with us. And as God is trying to shape us, at times we still will go back. We will want to go back because it's easy to be where we were, even though it was bad and it was bad for us. It's easier to be where we were as opposed to the unknown, even though the unknown may not be good. May be better for us, but because we don't know it, we would rather go back. If did I answer? Let me know if I answered your question or ask it another way.
Okay,
Okay.
my question was, I personally feel that they have gained an expectation because they found out who they are, saying that they've been through trouble in Egypt, and now we are the people of God, and so we shouldn't have to, because we are the people of God, we shouldn't have all of these issues. They kind of, maybe they feel that it should be easier.
I got you. If anybody who wants to can jump in. I'm still thinking that they still quite don't know. They just 3 days out of Egypt. Once, especially when they get to complaining about this water, which we're going to talk about tonight, they still are not sure. They had some successes. They have seen God work in some ways, but just like us, when we get to a new situation, we don't always carry over or remember what God has done for us already. Does somebody else want to chime in on that? Okay. Tawanda, does that make sense now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. They still very raw. I don't think they have any expectations at this
Hello?
point at all. Yes, sir.
May I keep this in mind that Israel been in Egypt, all they knew was Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Moses has not earned their trust yet.
There you go.
Moses is a new pastor. Pastor Moses and his new church is having an experiment or experience as he grow in trusting God in spite of himself. And now he's leading people, over 2 million people, that are slaves.
Yes.
And as slaves, I hate to say this on the internet, I don't know who else is listening, but slaves are not taught to think for themselves. They do as they are told.
Mm-hmm.
And now Moses is leading them to a new area as they're being emancipation from Egypt, where they must learn to think and trust a God they can't see.
Mm-hmm.
We're now working with Jehovah or Yahweh, which is an invisible God, that I am God, not the calves, not the rock, not the frog, not the lice, but we're working in a brand new area. Now, when as Reverend Jackson said, when we move out and see that they are being challenged to trust a God that they really don't know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like those of us who assume leadership in a new position. And God has showed us, we know what the words say, we know what we have to say, but the people we are leading don't know us well enough to follow us through we call it wilderness. This is really a desert. You walking in an area where there is no water, and 3 days with no water, then yet God will supply with no grocery store, no Kmart, no Walmart, no credit card, no nothing. But we have to learn to trust God. That's a real challenge for a lot of us. It's a real challenge. And so as we watch this group become a nation and get crafted into the people of God, as Reverend Jackson have said, they got to have some training. They got to have some experience. They got to have some things that they are going through that they can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, if it had not been for God, we couldn't have made it. And so those 10 complaints that she talked about, they're going to complain, and God will answer their complaints. And Moses will grow, and they will grow. And at the end of the day, we end up with Jesus. But it is a long journey. And sometime in our journey, the shortest distance is not always the best. The shortest route is not always the best. We need to go through some things, be trained, make it work. And I thank both of you for helping us with that.
Thank you so much. So, and again, just think about new experiences that we've had that we were not quite familiar with. We may have come through some other stuff, but when new stuff hits us, we don't know. And so, as I have appreciate where the children of Israel are at this time in their journey, I'm not so prone to talk against them, because I have been in situations where, okay, God, I know you did that back there, but can you do this? And okay, I'm just gonna be real about it. And so sometimes when we get in an unfamiliar situation, we will want to go back again. It may not have worked for us back there, but I know that devil better than I know the devil that's in front of me, so to speak. So perhaps somebody else may want to share their experiences in that, or hey, if you may have gotten it all together in those kinds of situations. But I think that's where Israel finds. That's where they find themselves. They don't know. They don't know Moses, and they don't know God. At least they don't know him to the point that they are ready to just drop everything and say whatever you say, God, I'll do. That's my perspective. So when we get to this second part, when we start in 15, after they have gotten through the Red Sea experience, yes, they saw what God did there. And so now we get ready to go to the second half of the book, where God has redeemed them, and now he's trying to grow them into being the nation of the privileged son, the privileged people that he has called them to be. Now remember, yes, Israel or the Jews are called the chosen people. And it is not because they were more special than anybody else. It is just the group of people that God chose to do his work with. And remember, it's not so much about these people as it is about Abraham. God chose Abraham because he saw that he could use Abraham. Now, perhaps there were others that he could have chosen, but he chose Abraham. And, just think about, we've looked at people and said, how in the world, there ain't nothing special about that person. That person does A, B, and C, or they don't know A, B, and C. And we say, well, why in the world would God choose them? Because God does what God wants to do. And that's just the bottom line. And so God chose this group of people to ultimately redeem his people, not just to bring this salvation, to bring them out of slavery, but ultimate to us. Ultimate to us. So when we get to we get on our journey, they get on their journey. Remember, I told you about the complaints. There are at least 3 miracles that God will have to perform while they are in the wilderness. Now, remember, I told you that instead of taking them the short way along the great sea, or the way of the sea, he takes them through a journey through some wilderness, lots of wilderness, and he's going to teach them. He's going to take their journey and give them some lessons to shape them to be the people that he has called them to be. They are not that people yet. He is still working with them. He is still training them. He is still teaching them. Just think about when God called us, whether it's to preach, to teach, to do whatever he has called us to do on this journey. We are not those people when he calls us. But along the way, he shapes us and molds us through our experiences to get us to be those people. So there are some experiences that they go through that they will that God will take and will use to teach them. So let's consider the first one we talked about was Exodus 15:20 through 26. And this is where they find themselves. They have gone through the Red Sea experience. They have seen what God did to pull back that water so they could go through and bring the water back that will drown Pharaoh's army. So they are 3 days out from that. And they find themselves at a place called Marah. And this is, if you read that part, they start to complain because they have no water. Now just think about, they have been moving 3 days and they are thirsty. They are depleted. They are dehydrated. Just think about, we can go without food, but we cannot go about water. These are real people with real human conditions. And so they find themselves in the desert with no water. And they complain. You brought us out here to die. We don't have anything to drink. And so they do stumble upon some water, but they complain that the water is bitter. In other words, not just bitter as we know bitter, but it's dirty. It's not clean water. And so around 22 through 26, if you have your Bible, you'll hear their complaint. And again, it's a legitimate complaint to me. Then Moses led them through the wilderness. They're in the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness. They found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink the water, for they were bitter. And that word Marah means bitter water or bitterness. And so the people grumbled and said, what shall we drink? And then who did Moses cry out? The people came to Moses. Moses went to God. Because Moses is the mediator. Moses is the in-between. And so then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree and he threw it in the waters, and the water became sweet. Now, I've been reading about this, and some said he here they use tree, but some places said it was actually the leaves. Now, whether or not the leaves themselves were sweet or God's turn it sweet, told him to choose this tree or choose these leaves, and God used those leaves, turned them sweet, told him to throw it in the water, and the water turned sweet. So however it was a miracle. And so he followed, Moses did what God told him, and they were able to drink. But here is the key. If we keep reading, when we get to verse 25, as we read, there he made for them a statute and a law, and he tested them. And he said, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and you do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians. For I, the Lord, am your healer. So again, God didn't make them complain, but since they complained, God used it as a teachable moment to show them that he was still God. And he said, I want to teach you that if you follow me, if you follow my commandments, I won't do to you what I did to the Egyptians. I want to show you that I am a God who heals. I'm not going to put what I did to Egyptians to you. So again, he is showing them or teaching them that I am a healer. So it was through the complaint. Again, God did not cause them to complain, but since they did, he used it as a teachable moment. Okay? Now, as they are getting from that, they continue on their journey, and look at verse 27. It says, now they have just come through a bad experience, no water. God shows them has Moses to throw the trees, the leaves in the water becomes sweet. He teaches them, but even though they had that rough patch, God then brings them through a place called Elam. And it says that there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and they camped beside the water. So they had a rough patch, but then God brings them to a resting place where there is springs of water and there are palm trees and everything is lovely. He gave them a time of refreshing. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are times when we do have bitter waters. We do have bitter situations, but God does not leave us in those situations. He brings us through a time of refreshing. He brings us to a time of where there are smooth waters. So in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is that trouble does not last always. That yes, we will have rough spots, and yes, we will have bitter waters, but God does not keep us there. He brings us to times of rejuvenation. Pastor Green.
The joy of it is, the trouble is like an evolving door. It's temporary, it doesn't last. But as soon as Moses obeyed God, put the tree in the water was sweet, they get through that experience of no water. But guess what? Now we don't have any grocery. So it's like, Moses, you're right. We didn't have any water. You took care of that problem. But we had the pots in Egypt, but something was always being cooked. We had flesh pots was there. We had stew. We had lentil. But now we have water. Now we have left the Egyptians behind dead on the sea, on the shores of the Red Sea. But we have no grocery. You see the transition, and I think I'm trying to say to us that as we grow in our journey and we accomplish one thing with God and we accomplish one thing and another thing, there always will be challenges and there always will be something that we have to trust God for, bigger level, higher level, bigger devils, as maybe used to say. But we trust God for the water. We okay. Our thirst has been taken care of. We're in this nice resort area, but we have no grocery. And so we got another complaint. Poor Moses, as soon as he solved one problem, there's no McDonald's, no Burger King, no Wendy's, no fast food, but they're hungry again. And I think you've already pointed out to us over and over, when they complain to Moses as the mediator, he has to go get help. And interesting the way our lives unfold. So just because we had victory today, we can't camp there, because tomorrow is going to be a brand new day.
Yes. And so they leave this. God gives them this refreshing time where they complain of water. Moses turns to God, turns the water sweet, and then he takes them to a place where it's nothing but water. He takes them to a place with nothing but water. They camp there for a while, but if you can see and continue on our journey here, Marah, where they had the wilderness, is bitter water, is not far from Elam, where they were. But they keep going. They keep going, and they end up at the wilderness of, if we look here, the wilderness of Sin, which is right here at the base of Mount Sinai, at the base of Mount Sinai. And there, as Pastor Green talked about, they dealt with nothing to eat. And so that's 16:1 through 36. It's the same thing. They complained to Moses. Moses complained to, or take it to God. God tells Moses what to do, and that problem is solved. So all of chapter 16 basically is about that. I'm not going to read it all to you, but I want you to see just that pattern. If you look at 16 verse 2, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, and I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. Now, God is going to give them some specific instructions on how he's going to provide them with manna, and that is some said that there was some type of grain, bread, but he's going to tell them exactly how to gather, or how to just get enough for your family. And he wants to see if they are going to follow his instructions. He says on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So in other words, from Monday, if you want to think about it, from Sunday to Friday, they're supposed to get just 2 quarts, as I talked about, an omer. They're only supposed to get 2. And then when it comes down to Friday, they're supposed to double up, because God is going to institute or show them about a Sabbath. He's going to show them about a Sabbath. He wants them to rest on the Sabbath to get, and so they're supposed to get everything that they need Friday for Saturday, so to speak, in our terminology. But he talks about the 6th day, but so that we'll understand what's going on. And so when we get to 6, so Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, at evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumbling against the Lord. What are we that we grumble against us? In other words, Moses said, we're not the, Moses, Aaron said, we're not the ones. What are we that you grumble against us? Moses said, this will happen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning, for the Lord hears your grumbling against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord. So we can see that Moses and Aaron, they're getting a little ticked off. They're getting a little tired. And saying, look, it's not us. The grumbling is really against God. So he takes them through all of this throughout this whole chapter, and you're going to, he says, only to get what you need. Only to get what you need. Don't take more because it's going to spoil. But then when you get to the 6th day, you gather what you need. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there won't be any. He is, remember, the 10 Commandments has not, they don't have that yet, where it says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So, but he is introducing this idea of Sabbath. And remember, Sabbath is about rejuvenation, a time of rest, a time, it's almost like a cycle, a clock that, that goes around. So when you get to the 7th day, it's time to kind of like shut it down so that you can get rejuvenated, you can get refreshed to start the journey all over again. Now remember, in my way of thinking, a true Sabbath does not involve being busy on a Sunday all day. In church, going to church all day, because if you just really think about it, but if you have not rejuvenated and refreshed yourself to be able to start the journey again, I'm not saying, not to do those things, but I am saying that the idea of Sabbath is to refresh, to replenish, is to rejuvenate. And God showed us that in the creation, not that God needed to do it, but he did it as an example for us. So again, what the main point is to show what their this whole cycle of complaining. And of course, God provided them what we call manna. And in verse 31, it says that it looks like a cornel seed, white. It was like wafers with honey. And he also them quail. And then we're going to see later on, they got tired of eating. They got tired of eating that. So that was another part of their journey that God used. Again, God didn't cause the complaint, but God used this idea as a teachable moment to give them some instructions to see if they were going to follow it. Do we have any questions at this time or any comments? Remember, if you don't want to ask them, you can use your chat and ask it that way. Okay. Now, the third one is in 17:1. Well, again, it involves water. Again, it involves water. So if you can see the map again, they have come through Elam rather, the wilderness of sin, and now they have come to a place when by the time we get to chapter 17, they have come to a place called Rephidim. And this is where they are going to again deal with water. So again, they're going to talk about water, complaining about a lack of water this time. The first time they had no water, they see the water is dirty, the water is bitter. They complain about that. Moses through God performs a miracle, the water becomes sweet. So this time they don't see any water at all. There is a lack of water. And so we will, if we begin reading in 17:1, then all the congregations of the sons of Israel journeyed by stages from the wilderness of sin according to the command of God, and they camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore, again, remember the pattern. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and they grumbled against Moses and said, "Why now have you brought us up out from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock?" So what does Moses do? Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What should I do with these people? A little more and they're going to stone me." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go." So that kind of sounds familiar to us. Remember when Moses had to use his staff before, when he was dealing with Pharaoh. And he says, "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock of Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he named this place Messiah and Meribah because of the quarrel of the sons of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" In other words, okay, Moses, you done brought us out here. Is God really out here? Is he really with us? And so again, they complain to Moses. Moses take it to God, and Moses is a little ticked off now. Why are you complaining against me? This is not me. It's, take your complaint to God. Pastor Green, you want to add something there?
Get in.
You in?
I'm in? Okay. Well, the fun part with this is, as an older person looking at it, and the impatience of those who are with Moses, and how Moses is trying to earn their trust and respect. He's being real obedient to God. He's following what he's told. But the impatience of the people is like in every crowd, every congregation, there will be some people who are just a little more trusting than others. But those who are trusting, has been my experience, they're not as vocal as the ones who are not. And I'm sure that it was not the majority of the people complaining against Moses, but there was enough to have him, he's getting frustrated. You can see it, you can read it in his writing. For as he writes to us and tell us what happened, he tells on himself. Why are you fussing at me? I was sent by God. You pray. Look how Moses said it. You prayed to God to deliver you. God sent me to deliver you. I didn't ask for this job. God said, "I have come down to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Pharaoh. And Moses, you go tell Pharaoh." So Moses said, "I didn't volunteer. I tried to get out of it." And he even sent Aaron. And now it's getting more and more intense. We're in the wilderness. We're lot of stress, a lot of frustration. Babies are crying, the cows are mooing, the goats and everything is crying because of thirst. And that was a different cry from a thirsty person or a hungry person than a person who's jubilant. You know, sometimes people cry because they're happy. But when a baby is hungry or thirsty, it has a different cry. And so Moses has to listen to this. And then he has to come up with an answer on one side. And mind you, the enemy is not far from him. The Amalekites are not far. They're following him. They're ready to attack. So you got to prepare for war just in case while it's peace. You have to take care of the needs of the people. You have to trust God. And at the same time, in churches, they got to make your budget. It's a clumsy art being in charge and pastoring and looking at a parallel of how Moses is working and how the church today works. We own to something great that's going to help a lot of people when we see the whole story.
And you are right that they're going to find themselves having to deal with, for the first time since they left Egypt, once we get to 17:8 through 16, they're going to have to deal with the Amalekites. And this is the first time that they will have to deal with external pressure. Everything up to this point, since they have come through the Red Sea, has been internal. The complaining, you know, Moses is just them. But when they get to chapter 17, verse 8, they're going to have to deal with the Amalekites and in a fight. And so when we get to 9, Moses said to Joshua, choose men for us and go out and fight. Tomorrow I will station myself on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses told him, and they fought against Amalek, and Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Now, we've heard this scripture a lot when we talk about, and I think this is where people get this, you know, we hear this term, armor bearers, armor bearers, armor bearers. And we see what that looks like in the 21st century. But here is where the root of that is, where Moses told them, go back to 10. Joshua did as Moses told him and fought against Amalek, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So it came about when Moses held his hand up that Israel prevailed. And when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. Both Moses' hands were heavy. Then they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other. Thus his hands were steady until the sun set. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. So let's go back and look at that scenario there. So the idea is that every time Moses held his hands up, they were winning. But when he got tired and his hands went down, the other side was winning. So they said, okay, if this is, we got to do something to help Moses keep his hand up. We got to support him. We have to strengthen him. So what we're going to do is, Hur, you're going to be on one side. Aaron, you're going to be on one side, and you're going to hold the man of God's hands up so that we could win this fight. My brothers, my sisters, this is a real picture of an armor bearer, or one who supports the leader. So again, they were able to win because they supported Moses. They gave Moses the support that he needed. And when we get to 14, then the Lord says to Moses, write this in a book as a memorial and recite it to Joshua that I will utterly blot out the memory of the Amalek from under the heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it, The Lord is my banner. And he said, the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek. Let me see, I'm sorry. And he said, the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation. In other words, because of your obedience, you won't even ever remember this. We're going to just basically destroy this enemy. So again, the picture is, this is the first time that they have had an enemy outside of the camp. And they took it as an opportunity, and they saw what it looked like to win. And to win, they were going to have to support Moses. They were going to have to support Moses. And so again, as we look at these different scenarios and these different complaints, we see how God has used these as teachable moments to shape these people to be the people that he can call a great nation. Okay, we kind of went through this. So I want to get you to chapter 19. If you give me just a few more minutes, I want to get you to chapter 19. But the whole chapter 18 is Moses goes back to his father-in-law Jethro, and they talk about Moses is getting tired. We can see that all the people coming to him with the complaining, and his father-in-law is telling him, look, you can't do this by yourself. You're going to have to get some help. You're going to have to divide the people up, take the small issues to the people, those people, give people responsibilities, and let them handle the small things, and then the big stuff you can handle. But he is giving Moses a lesson in the power of delegation. My brothers and sisters, when we're in leadership, we have to understand the power of delegation. That Moses was about to wear himself out. Now we can see he's beginning to get a little anxious, a little angry. He's getting upset. They're getting tired, and he was not going to last doing that. He was not going to last doing that. So his father-in-law tell him, you're going to wear yourself out. Both you and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy. You cannot do it alone. And so Moses listens to his father-in-law. He chooses him some able people out of Israel and made them leaders. And they were to take the disputes to handle the minor disputes, and then Moses will handle the big problems. But when we get to chapter 19, when we get to verse 5, there is a change in the atmosphere. This is where they have gotten to Mount Sinai. In the 3rd month after the sons of Israel had gone out of Egypt, on the very day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. When they set out from Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness, and there Israel camped in front of the mountain. And so they are right where they need to be. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now this is a very key verse, verses 5 and 6. Now then, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, and then you shall be my own possessions among all the people, from all the earth is mine, and ye shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you should speak to the sons of Israel. What God is saying is that I have chosen you. If you obey me, you are my prized possession. I have chosen you out of all the people on the earth. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, you are not that yet, but I'm going to make you into a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is what God is telling them he's going to do. If you keep my commands, I'm going to shape you to be my people. You're going to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, where have we heard that before? Over in Hebrews, it talks about we are a royal priesthood. See, there's some parallels. So this is a turning point that God is going to begin to give them some laws. And as we go forward next week, we're going to talk about these laws, these 10 commandments, and things of that nature. Now, before we end, I just want to give you something to think about for next week as we begin to think about the 10 commandments. Here's the question. Should the 10 commandments be posted in public places? In public places, I mean the government places, the city halls, the courthouses, the place of the people, all people. That's the question. Should the 10 commandments, which God has given to his people, be posted in public places? And we should have a good discussion on that next week.